They found his body floating face down in the Thames, his research notes scattered like autumn leaves across the murky water. Another scholar who dug too deep into secrets that powerful forces would kill to protect. What if everything you know about Atlantis is a carefully constructed lie, and the real truth is so terrifying that men have murdered for centuries to keep it buried in the shadows of history? The name Atlantis conjures images of a mystical lost city beneath the waves, but that sanitized version is exactly what they want you to believe. Hidden in the deepest vaults of secret societies, encoded in the works of history's greatest minds, and written in blood across the pages of forbidden manuscripts, the true prophecies of Atlantis have survived. These aren't gentle wisdom teachings, but warnings of such devastating accuracy that they've predicted every major catastrophe in human history. The prophecies don't just predict the future, they reveal how to control it, containing keys to harnessing forces that modern science can barely comprehend. Throughout history, men like Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, and Nikola Tesla understood fragments of this power, leaving coded messages in their work before the guardians of secrecy silenced them forever. According to the third and final prophecy, we're living in the last days before the ultimate revelation. The same forces that destroyed Atlantis are stirring once again, and this time there may be nowhere to hide. The prophecies are awakening, and time is running out. Chapter 1. The Keepers of the Crystal Codex. In the shadowy corridors of Oxford's Bodleian Library, there exists a collection that doesn't appear in any public catalogue. Hidden behind false walls and accessible only through passages known to a select few, these vaults contain the most dangerous books ever written. Among them, bound in covers made from materials that predate any known civilization, lie the Crystal Codices of Atlantis. The story begins not with Plato's famous dialogues, but with what he deliberately left out. When the Greek philosopher penned his accounts of Atlantis in Timaeus and Critias, he was working from source material so explosive that he dared only publish a fraction of what he'd learned. The complete records, obtained during his travels in Egypt, where they'd been guarded by priests for millennia, contained prophecies that could topple every power structure in the ancient world. According to these forbidden texts, Atlantis possessed a form of crystalline technology that could manipulate the very fabric of reality. These weren't primitive tools, but sophisticated devices that could harness the planet's magnetic field, control weather patterns, and even peer into the streams of time itself. The Atlanteans had used this technology to see their own destruction coming, and in their final days, they recorded 3 great prophecies that would govern the fate of all future civilizations. But knowledge this powerful doesn't simply disappear when a civilization falls. It finds new guardians, and throughout history, a secret brotherhood has protected these prophecies from those who would misuse them. This order, known only as the Custodes Atlanticus, has operated in the shadows for over 2,000 years, ensuring that the prophecies remain hidden until humanity is ready to face their implications. The first known member of this order in recorded history was none other than Francis Bacon, the English philosopher and statesman who lived from 1561 to 1626. Bacon's published works on scientific method and political philosophy made him famous. But his true obsession lay with the encrypted knowledge he'd inherited from earlier guardians. Hidden within his seemingly innocent essays and treatises were elaborate codes that preserved fragments of Atlantean wisdom. Bacon's New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1627, wasn't the utopian fiction that scholars believed it to be. It was a carefully disguised manual for reconstructing Atlantean society, complete with instructions for technologies that wouldn't be invented for centuries. The airships he described, the underwater vessels, the devices for long-distance communication, all of these were based on blueprints from the Crystal Codices. But Bacon knew the dangers of revealing too much too quickly. He'd seen what happened to those who attempted to expose the prophecies prematurely. Giordano Bruno, the Italian philosopher who was burned at the stake in 1600, had possessed a partial copy of the first prophecy. His crime wasn't just supporting the heliocentric model of the universe, it was his attempts to reveal the true cosmic forces that the Atlanteans had warned about. The pattern repeated itself throughout history. Scholars who got too close to the truth found themselves facing mysterious accidents, sudden illnesses, or charges of heresy. The Order of Guardians wasn't evil, but they understood that knowledge released at the wrong time could be more destructive than beneficial. They'd witnessed firsthand what happened when Atlantean technology fell into the wrong hands. The prophecies themselves were unlike anything found in other ancient texts. Rather than vague symbolic language, they contained precise mathematical formulas astronomical calculations, and detailed descriptions of future events. The first prophecy spoke of a great burning that would consume the old world and give birth to the new. It provided exact dates, geographical locations, and even described the political circumstances that would lead to this transformation. Those who studied these predictions realized with growing horror that they were witnessing their fulfillment in real time. The fall of the Roman Empire, the rise of Christianity, the plague years of the 14th century, all of it had been foretold with disturbing accuracy. But more terrifying still was the realization that if the first prophecy was true, then the second and third would follow inevitably. As the centuries passed, the Guardians recruited carefully, seeking individuals with the intellectual capacity to understand the prophecies and the moral strength to bear the burden of such knowledge. They found kindred spirits among the greatest minds of each generation, men who were already pushing the boundaries of human understanding and who could be trusted with secrets that might otherwise drive lesser minds to madness. The order developed elaborate rituals for initiation, not out of mystical tradition, but out of practical necessity. The human mind needed time to adjust to the implications of what the prophecies revealed. New initiates were gradually exposed to increasingly disturbing truths, their psychological resilience tested at each stage. Those who couldn't handle the weight of forbidden knowledge were quietly removed from the order, their memories carefully altered to forget what they'd learned. By the 16th century, the Guardians had established hidden libraries in major cities across Europe. These repositories contain not only the original crystal codices, but also the accumulated research of centuries of study. Maps showing the locations of other Atlantean artifacts, translations of texts in languages that predated known writing systems, and most dangerous of all, practical applications of Atlantean technology that could be implemented using contemporary materials. The Order's influence extended into the highest levels of society. Kings and popes counted Guardians among their advisors, though few of these rulers ever learned the true source of the wisdom they received. Political decisions that shaped the course of nations were often guided by knowledge gleaned from prophecies that had been written before recorded history began. But secrecy came at a cost. The constant vigilance required to protect the prophecies, the need to eliminate threats before they could spread dangerous knowledge, the weight of knowing humanity's fate while being powerless to change it, all of this took a psychological toll on the Guardians. Many suffered from what later generations would recognize as severe depression and anxiety, driven to the edge of sanity by the terrible burden they carried. As the 17th century dawned, the Guardians faced their greatest challenge yet. The second prophecy was beginning to unfold, and unlike the gradual transformation predicted by the first, this one promised sudden and catastrophic change. The Order would need to make difficult decisions about how much to reveal and to whom, knowing that the wrong choice could trigger the very disasters they sought to prevent. Chapter 2. The Prophetic Warnings Unveiled. In the winter of 1687, Isaac Newton suffered what his contemporaries described as a nervous breakdown. He stopped eating regularly, barely slept, and filled notebook after notebook with calculations that seemed to have no connection to his published work on physics and mathematics. What the world didn't know was that Newton had just been inducted into the Custodes Atlanticus, and the weight of the second prophecy was driving him to the edge of madness. The second prophecy of Atlantis was more specific and more terrifying than the first. Where the initial prediction had spoken in broad terms about the rise and fall of civilizations, this one provided exact details about a period of global upheaval that would reshape human society forever. According to the crystal codices, this transformation would begin with the discovery of forces that could split the very atoms of matter, leading to weapons of unimaginable destruction. Newton's obsession with alchemy wasn't the eccentric hobby that historians would later claim it to be. He was desperately trying to understand the atomic theories described in the Atlantean texts, working backward from prophecies that described nuclear weapons centuries before atoms were even discovered. His secret laboratory was filled with apparatus designed according to Atlantean principles, devices that attempted to replicate the crystalline technologies that had once powered an entire civilization. The prophecy spoke of two great wars that would engulf the entire planet, conflicts so devastating that they would force humanity to choose between evolution and extinction. The first would begin when the old monarchies of Europe collapsed under the weight of their own corruption, triggered by a revolution that would spread like wildfire across the continent. The second would arise from the ashes of the first, fueled by ideologies that promised paradise but delivered only suffering. But the most disturbing aspect of the prophecy wasn't its predictions of warfare, but its descriptions of the technological advances that would make such conflicts possible. The Atlantean seers had foreseen the development of flying machines that could rain death from the sky, underwater vessels that could strike without warning, and, most horrifying of all, weapons that could turn entire cities into ash in the span of seconds. Newton understood the implications immediately. The prophecy wasn't just predicting future events, it was providing a roadmap for their creation. Hidden within the mathematical formulas were the principles needed to harness atomic energy, to build flying machines, to develop the technologies that would define the modern world. The question that tormented him was whether revealing this knowledge would prevent the catastrophes or accelerate them. Working in absolute secrecy, Newton began translating portions of the crystal codices into code, hiding the formulas within his published works on mathematics and physics. His law of universal gravitation contained embedded calculations for anti-gravity propulsion. His work on optics included diagrams for laser technology disguised as simple geometric proofs. Even his theological writings were filled with encrypted references to Atlantean prophecies. The Guardians had learned from Francis Bacon's example that the safest way to preserve dangerous knowledge was to hide it in plain sight. By spreading fragments of Atlantean wisdom across multiple disciplines and encoding them within accepted scientific principles, they could ensure the information would survive even if individual Guardians were eliminated. Future generations would eventually rediscover these hidden truths when humanity was ready to handle them responsibly. But Newton's work revealed another disturbing aspect of the prophecies. They weren't just passive predictions of what might happen, they were active instructions for what must happen. The Atlanteans had realized that their civilization's destruction was part of a larger cycle, a necessary pruning that allowed for new growth. The prophecies weren't warnings to be heeded, they were stages in an evolutionary process that couldn't be stopped. This realization led to heated debates within the Order of Guardians. Some argued that their duty was to prevent the catastrophes described in the prophecies, while others believed their role was simply to preserve the knowledge until humanity was ready to understand its purpose. The faction that emerged victorious would shape the course of the next 3 centuries, and their decision would have consequences that reached far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As the 18th century progressed, the Guardians watched with growing unease as political movements began to emerge that matched the descriptions in the prophecies. Revolutionary ideologies that promised to overthrow the old order and create perfect societies, charismatic leaders who claimed to speak for the common people while accumulating unprecedented power, technological advances that exceeded what should have been possible given the level of scientific understanding at the time. The French Revolution of 1789 fulfilled the prophecy's predictions with chilling accuracy. Not only did it begin exactly when the Atlantean calculations suggested it would, but it followed the pattern of social upheaval described in the crystal codices down to the smallest details. The Guardians realized they were no longer studying ancient predictions, they were witnessing the unfolding of a cosmic plan that had been set in motion long before human civilization began. By the early 19th century, it became clear that the second prophecy was accelerating toward its climax. The Industrial Revolution was providing the technological foundation for the conflicts to come, while political tensions were building exactly as the Atlanteans had foreseen. The Guardians faced a terrible choice: attempt to prevent the approaching catastrophes and risk disrupting the larger evolutionary process, or allow events to unfold naturally and accept responsibility for the suffering that would follow. The decision they made would haunt the Order for generations to come as the 20th century dawned with all the promise and peril that the prophecies had foretold. Chapter 3: The Modern Conspiracy. The letter arrived at the British Museum on a fog-shrouded morning in October 1938, bearing the seal of the Ahnenerbe, Heinrich Himmler's Occult Research Division. Its contents would have seemed absurd to most recipients, but Dr. Margaret Blackwood knew exactly what the Nazis were really asking for. They wanted access to the Atlantean archives, and they were willing to kill for it. The rise of Nazi Germany hadn't surprised the Guardians of the Crystal Codices. The prophecies had clearly described a period when ancient knowledge would be perverted by those seeking absolute power, when the technologies of Atlantis would be weaponized by madmen who understood their destructive potential but not their true purpose. What the Guardians hadn't anticipated was how quickly the Nazis would uncover clues to the Order's existence. Hitler's obsession with the occult was well documented, but his true motivation lay deeper than most historians realized. During his time in Vienna as a struggling artist, he had encountered fragments of Atlantean texts in the private collection of a wealthy patron. These incomplete translations spoke of a master race that had once ruled the world through superior technology and mystical knowledge. Hitler became convinced that the German people were descendants of these Atlantean survivors, destined to reclaim their birthright through conquest and purification. But the Nazis weren't the only ones who had discovered traces of the Atlantean legacy. In his laboratory at Colorado Springs, Nikola Tesla was experiencing breakthroughs that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. His wireless transmission experiments, his claims about death rays and particle beam weapons, his bizarre assertions about communicating with extraterrestrial intelligence, all of these were based on principles he'd learned from studying Atlantean technologies. Tesla's genius wasn't just in his ability to understand these ancient designs, but in his skill at adapting them for modern use. The alternating current electrical system that powered the world was based on Atlantean energy distribution methods. His rotating magnetic field principle was a simplified version of the gravitational manipulation techniques described in the crystal codices. Even his famous Tesla coils were crude attempts to recreate the resonance amplifiers that had once channeled the Earth's natural energies. The inventor's eccentricities and increasingly erratic behavior weren't signs of mental illness, as his critics claimed, but symptoms of the psychological strain that came with accessing knowledge too advanced for his time. Like Newton before him, Tesla was trying to compress centuries of technological development into a single lifetime, and the effort was taking a devastating toll on his sanity. As World War II erupted across Europe, the race to unlock Atlantean secrets intensified. Allied intelligence services, alerted by Guardian infiltrators to the Nazi expeditions, launched their own covert archaeological missions. The real reason for certain military operations in North Africa and the Pacific had nothing to do with strategic objectives and everything to do with securing ancient sites before enemy forces could reach them. The Manhattan Project, officially dedicated to developing atomic weapons, had a classified secondary purpose that appeared nowhere in the historical record. While Robert Oppenheimer and his team worked on nuclear fission using conventional scientific methods, a parallel research program was attempting to recreate the atomic manipulation techniques described in the Atlantean texts. The project's most sensitive files, sealed under classifications that remain in effect today, contained translations of crystal codex passages that provided theoretical frameworks for technologies that wouldn't be officially discovered for decades. In the aftermath of the war, the Guardians faced their greatest crisis in 2 millennia. The rapid pace of technological development was making it impossible to control the spread of dangerous knowledge. Fragments of Atlantean wisdom were appearing in scientific journals, engineering textbooks, and military research programs around the world. The Order's traditional methods of secrecy and selective revelation were becoming obsolete in an age of mass communication and international collaboration. The solution they devised was both elegant and terrifying. Rather than trying to suppress the emerging technologies, the Guardians decided to guide their development through a network of infiltrators placed in key positions throughout government, academia, and industry. Presidents and prime ministers would receive advice from Guardians disguised as scientific advisors. University research programs would be subtly steered toward discoveries that aligned with prophetic timelines. Corporate development projects would be influenced by Guardian executives who understood the larger implications of their work. This conspiracy wasn't motivated by greed or power, but by the terrible responsibility of shepherding humanity through the transition described in the third prophecy. The Atlanteans had foreseen that their descendants would face a choice between transcendence and extinction, and the Guardians were determined to ensure that choice was made with full knowledge of its consequences. As the 20th century drew to a close, the signs of the third prophecy's approach were becoming unmistakable. Computer technology was advancing at a rate that exceeded the most optimistic predictions. Artificial intelligence was evolving from science fiction into reality, and astronomical discoveries were revealing a universe far stranger and more populated than anyone had imagined. The final phase was beginning, and humanity was running out of time to prepare for what was coming. Chapter 4. The Final Revelation. The email arrived simultaneously at observatories, universities, and government facilities around the world at exactly 12 minutes past midnight GMT on January 1st, 2024. Its origin couldn't be traced, its encryption couldn't be broken, and its content sent shockwaves through the highest levels of global intelligence services. The message was simple: the time of revelation has arrived. The children of Atlantis return home. For the Guardians of the Crystal Codices, this moment had been anticipated for over 2 millennia. The third and final prophecy was beginning to unfold, marking the end of humanity's childhood and the beginning of something unprecedented in the history of consciousness itself. But unlike the previous prophecies, which had been passive predictions of inevitable events, this one required active participation from those who possessed the ancient knowledge. The prophecy spoke of a convergence, a moment when the barriers between dimensions would weaken and allow contact with the consciousness that had originally seeded Atlantean civilization. This wasn't the return of ancient astronauts or the resurrection of a lost race, but something far more profound: the awakening of humanity's latent psychic abilities and the revelation of our true place in a cosmic community that spans galaxies. According to the crystal codices, the Atlanteans hadn't been destroyed by natural disaster or human folly. They had undergone a planned transformation, evolving beyond physical existence into pure consciousness while leaving behind carefully timed instructions for their genetic and spiritual descendants. Earth had been transformed into a nursery world where human consciousness could develop the necessary complexity to join this greater collective. But the prophecy also contained warnings about the dangers of this transition period. Not everyone would be capable of making the evolutionary leap, and those who clung to old patterns of thinking would become increasingly desperate and dangerous as the transformation accelerated. The Guardians had spent centuries preparing for this moment, establishing hidden networks of initiated individuals who could guide humanity through the coming chaos. The recent proliferation of conspiracy theories and alternative spiritual movements wasn't accidental background noise, but a deliberate preparation strategy. By gradually introducing concepts like ancient astronauts, hidden technologies, and suppressed knowledge through popular culture and fringe communities, the Guardians had been preparing collective human consciousness for revelations that would otherwise be too shocking to accept. The internet itself had been the final piece of the preparation puzzle. The global communication network wasn't just a technological achievement, but a primitive prototype of the consciousness linking systems described in the Atlantean texts. Social media platforms, online gaming communities, and digital collaboration tools were training humanity for the kind of collective thinking that would be necessary in the post-transformation world. Now, as the prophecy entered its active phase, those preparations were about to be tested. The consciousness that had guided Atlantean civilization was preparing to make direct contact, not through dramatic public announcements or alien landings, but through subtle influences on human thought and creativity. Artists would find themselves creating works that contained knowledge they didn't consciously possess. Scientists would make intuitive leaps that solved problems they hadn't been formally studying. Ordinary people would begin experiencing heightened psychic abilities and unprecedented insights into the nature of reality. The children of Atlantis were indeed coming home, but home was no longer a place on Earth. It was a state of being that transcended physical existence entirely, and humanity's invitation to join that cosmic community came with no guarantee of survival for those who chose to remain behind. The prophecies were complete, the ancient warnings had been fulfilled, and the age of hidden knowledge was drawing to a close. What emerged from the revelation would no longer be recognizably human in the traditional sense, but it would be what humanity had always been destined to become. The final choice was approaching, and there would be no turning back.